Twin Leopards Entertainment presents So I saw Mandy, and at the time of writing this, I'm still trying to process what I saw. For nearly half a day after watching it, I spent much of my time reading reviews about it online and couldn't really stop thinking about it. It's been a while since a movie has had such an effect on me, and although the film wasn't perfect, I do have to give it credit for that. As I mentioned in my earlier videos about the weirdest movies of 2018, Mandy is my personal favorite movie of 2018 and is my pick for weirdest picture of the year. So let's talk about it. As always, I like to talk about a film's director when relevant. In this case, our director is the Italian-Canadian Panos Cosmatos, son of filmmaker George P. Cosmatos, who is known for films such as Rambo 2 and Tombstone. If comments on Reddit could be believed, George Cosmatos did not really have too much creative controls over his movies and acted more as a ghost director or a director for hire rather than an auteur. His son, however, is definitely an auteur, having released one film 8 years previous to Mandy called Beyond the Black Rainbow that is very similar to Mandy in subject matter and visual style. Both films are even set in the same year, 1983, and feature narcissistic antagonists who do a lot of psychedelic drugs, and they may possibly be set in the same universe. When I first watched Black Rainbow around 3 to 4 years ago, I remembered liking it but not loving it. Having seen Mandy, I've rewatched Rainbow and found a new appreciation for it. The two films are very good companion pieces, but in my opinion, Cosmatos really hit over the park with his sophomore effort. I could spend a whole video talking about both films and how they are different but the same but different, but I will keep my discussion of Rainbow brief for now. Both films are slow paced and take 36 to 37 minutes for shit to go down, but Black Rainbow's build-up feels so much longer than Mandy's and less significant to the rest of the film. Mandy also has a simpler and more coherent plot than Rainbow, and its underlying themes are more complex. Both are recommended viewing, but I would watch Mandy first. If you like Mandy, you will probably like Rainbow, and if you already like Rainbow, you will most definitely love Mandy. At its heart, Mandy is more of an audio-visual experience than a movie. I've seen people comparing the film to 2001: A Space Odyssey, the original Suspiria, and 2017's Mother. I've also seen it being accused of style over substance, and I do agree in a way, but at the same time, I don't think that's a bad thing. Yes, this movie is very slow and rather hypnotic with a focus on sustained psychedelic shots. Yes, the plot is very simple and could probably be summed up in a couple of sentences, and given the lack of super in-depth character development, the claim that most of Mandy's 2 hours runtime is spent masturbating in its own cinematography is not without merit. I've seen arguments that half an hour of the film could have easily been cut in order to improve the pacing, but for me the charm of Mandy lies within its slow pace, dreamy visuals, and music. This is one of those rare cases where the style is the substance. Yes, I know that saying that is almost as cliche as saying that a movie is style over substance to begin with, but I think that this is true in this case. Sure, maybe you could make an hour and 30-minute cut of the film without sacrificing the plot, but it probably wouldn't have nearly the same effect on its viewer. Panos has paced Mandy very deliberately, and messing with that pacing would probably change the effect of the film dramatically. If you find Mandy boring, then maybe it's not the film for you, and that's okay. This is certainly not a movie for everyone, and I certainly wouldn't recommend it to everyone. But if you could put yourself in a mindset where you are able to be patient with a film and simply let the experience wash over you, then you might enjoy Mandy. I've never been under the influence of psychedelic drugs, but after seeing Mandy, I feel like I don't have to. Mandy is one hell of a bad trip. First off, I have to geek out a bit about the song that opens the film, Starless by King Crimson. I'm a huge King Crimson fan, so this was especially a treat. It's also a perfect song to set the mood of the film, and I also believe it to be relevant to the major themes of the movie, but we will talk about that later. The rest of the soundtrack is done by the recently deceased Jóhannsson, who has previously worked with Denis Villeneuve on scores for Prisoners, Sicario, and Arrival. This score for Mandy is exactly what it should be, full of ambient doom and gloom, and featuring the work of drone and doom metal guitarist Stephen O'Malley from the band Sun-O. The score is an integral part of the film, and Jóhannsson definitely delivers the goods. As mentioned earlier, the plot of Mandy is very simple and could probably be summed up very quickly in a couple of sentences. While I usually recommend going into movies spoiler-free, in the case of Mandy, even if you know the general plot before watching it, the experience would probably not be ruined for you. The movie is actually rather predictable in a sense, and you can easily see where things are going. Of course, there are certain unpredictable details that no one except Cosmatos could probably have seen coming, but the main plot has already been acted out for us in countless films that we have already seen. Much like Beyond the Black Rainbow, Mandy is very much a homage to many other movies while still having its own unique voice and being more than the sum of its parts. So why is the movie set in 1983? Is it to cash in on the 80s nostalgia trend that got popularized by Stranger Things? If so, the movie doesn't do a very good job. Other than a commercial scene on TV and a radio snippet of a Ronald Reagan speech, Mandy doesn't really hit us over the head with the fact that we're in the 80s. It's kind of timeless actually. And the movie actually seems to be much more nostalgic towards late 60s and early 70s. And it's quite reminiscent of films made during that time. One thing which struck me while I rewatched Beyond the Black Rainbow is how much more 80s it feels than Mandy. Just compare the end credit songs of Black Rainbow with the opening credits of Mandy. In Black Rainbow, we are left with the synth pop tune Anonymous by SSQ released in 1983, while in Mandy we have Starless, which was released in 1974. Unlike Black Rainbow, Mandy almost feels like a 2018 movie emulating a 1983's movie interpretation of a late 60s or early 70s movie. It's like a throwback. Mandy herself even wears a Black Sabbath t-shirt for much of her screen time, calling to mind the band which led the way to the metal genre with their 1969 self-titled release. In 1983, Black Sabbath released Born Again, which represented the beginning of the end of their relevance. Additionally, much like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Mandy acts as a reflection on drug culture, set during a time where that culture was nearly dead. There's also a personal reason for the setting of 1983. According to Panos, 1983 was the year when, as a child, he would make up stories based on the covers of horror movies in video stores, which he wasn't allowed to watch. In a way, both Black Rainbow and Mandy aren't really set in 1983 as we know it, but rather in a fictional 1983 within the twisted and creative mind of Panos Cosmatos as a boy and filtered through his eyes as an adult. Despite the slow pace of Mandy, there is not much character development throughout the film. Both Red and Mandy's characters aren't very well defined, and Mandy in particular remains an enigma. That doesn't mean that the characters are one-dimensional, unrealistic, or uninteresting. Red and Mandy are defined mostly by the very subtle acting of Nicolas Cage and Andrea Riseborough, and I feel as if I know them better after a second and third viewing. Even though this is a movie where Cage fashions a battle axe and goes on a rampage, he's still able to deliver a very subtle and nuanced performance, further proving that when given the chance, Nicolas Cage can and will act the shit out of whatever role you give him. Red is a very interesting character, and even though the film is called Mandy, it's Red who leads us on this strange and bloody journey in the second half of the movie. For much of the first half of the movie, Red is rather in the background, but that does not mean that the character is underdeveloped. In fact, everything that one can infer about Red's character must be based on his actions in the first half of the movie, as beyond that, the character is no longer in any normal circumstances. So what do we know about Red? First of all, we know his occupation, a lumberjack. In the very first scene of the movie, Red is introduced to us as the simple, hard-working American man. We see him turn down the offer of alcohol and cop the ride and turn off the radio shortly after Ronald Reagan mentioned the word pornography, as if it triggers him. Not only does this set up the resurgence of both alcohol and pornography in the second half of the film, but it also tells us something about Red as a person. Later in the movie, it is implied that he used to hunt, but gave it up, probably due to Mandy's love of animals. Red seems to idolize his wife due to her virtues and artisticness, and appears to have made an effort to change for her. It's obvious that Mandy is the center of his world, and the only thing that Red really cares about, making his actions later in the film even more understandable and heartbreaking. When I first saw this scene with Mandy walking in the woods, two adjectives to describe her came to mind: haunting and haunted. Mandy looks like the witch on the cover of Black Sabbath's debut album, Come to Life. She seems to represent corrupted innocence. As noted before, she's much more in tune to the arts in Red, given that she spends most of her time reading and drawing and listening to music. She empathizes upon seeing a dead animal in the forest, leading her to reminisce upon a story of animal abuse from her childhood. Despite her love for heavy satanic metal, she represents a twisted view of virtue and innocence. She certainly does not have the innocence of a child, but rather the innocence of an adult who tries to view the world like a child through her art. The cult leader Jeremiah Sand becomes obsessed with Mandy because he thinks there is something special about her, and as a viewer, one almost wonders if there is something special about her. Her presence certainly haunts the movie, and you can say that she haunts the characters of Red and Jeremiah. Having watched the movie a second time, I'm more inclined to believe that there is nothing special about anybody, and that nothing supernatural is going on, which makes the story possibly even more tragic. Jeremiah Sand is a fabulous villain. He seems to be crafted most closely after Charles Manson, right down to being a musician. He's a LSD using Jesus freak that thinks he has been especially chosen by God to take whatever he wants on the earth. During my first watch, he appeared intimidating and powerful in his first scene, but this image was quickly squandered in a scene in the middle of the film. And when we see him at the end of the movie, we realize that Jeremiah Sand was simply a pathetic man. Sand's first scenes struck me as intimidating during my first watch, but they actually came across as comedic during my second watch. He's a very interesting character, and Linus Roache does a great job of bringing him to life. Nicolas Cage was originally considered for this character, and he would have done a great job too, but I'm glad he didn't play Sand, as I can't imagine the film without Cage playing Red. Before I move into a spoiler-filled, in-depth analysis of the film's themes and a discussion on some nitpicks I had, I want to give my overall view of the film. Mandy is not a perfect movie, and it is not a film for everyone. If you have gone this far in the review, you should probably know by now whether it is for you or not. Like many of the weird movies I review, I do not recommend it to everyone, and I definitely wouldn't watch it with my grandmother. But if you think you can tune into the slow-paced, phantasmagoric experience that Mandy has to offer, Mandy is highly recommended. Time for the pretentious part of the review. Let me just put on my spectacles. Mandy as a critique and homage to counterculture. What do Black Sabbath, Charles Manson, the hippie movement, biker gangs, and fantasy novels all have in common? They're all representative of the counterculture. Mandy is both a celebration of and a criticism of the social tendency to form subcultures that go against the mainstream. This is why so much of this 1983 set movie seems to be stuck in the 70s. An age where many of the prominent countercultures got their start. By the time Mandy takes place, these cultures are dying, and only the more extreme members of the subcultures keep it alive. This is what Jeremiah Sand represents, a byproduct of the 70s drug culture. This is what happens when counterculture goes too far. Yet, at the same time, Mandy embraces counterculture by being a part of it. You certainly cannot call Mandy mainstream, despite its current critical acclaim. One could argue that the thesis statement of Mandy is that, when taken to its extremes, counterculture could become worse than the ideals of the mainstream culture that were originally being opposed. Ultimately, Mandy suggests that when one takes anything too seriously and gives it too much importance, bad things can happen. Take The Cult, for example. During the first viewing, I was certain that there was something supernatural going on here, even considering the possibility that Sand really was connected to God, or at least a god. During my second watch, I came to the conclusion that Sand and the cultists were just delusional. There is nothing special about Sand, or the knife that he gives a weird name to, or the horn of Abraxas that he used to call the bikers. The knife is just a knife, the horn is just a horn, and Sand is just a man who took too much LSD. Mandy was killed over nothing, and Red's life was ruined over nothing. While Mandy is probably going to be a personal favorite movie of mine, I must admit that the movie isn't perfect. The black skulls are my main problem. They certainly look cool and menacing, but it's difficult for me to suspend my disbelief, especially given my current rating of the film that there isn't anything supernatural going on. Carruthers states that they were simply given a bad batch of LSD, which would indicate that they are human but fucked in the head. The problem with that is that no amount of LSD or spontaneous mutations will make you have a knife for a dick. That detail is most definitely absurd, dark, and surreal and all, but it doesn't really fit in with the rest of the movie. In fact, I think the black skulls didn't really belong in the movie at all. They would have been better suited to Black Rainbow rather than Mandy. I honestly think that the only reason they were in the movie is because Panos thought they were cool. Every time they appeared, they just kind of took me out of it. They don't even do anything in terms of the plot. The old lady found out where Mandy lived without their help, so they could have just kidnapped them themselves. I guess you can say that the bikers acted as the muscle, but really the cultists could have probably done it themselves, to be honest. They were sleeping. It's not that hard to tie people up and give them drugs. Anyways, the bottom line is I liked the Black Skulls, but I didn't really like them in this movie. The other nitpick I have is that scene with Carruthers. How does he know about the Black Skulls while Cates doesn't? Did we really need an exposition dump this late into a movie that previously was built on mystery and ambiguity? During my second and third watch, I kind of appreciated the character and the scene for its function as kind of sobering up after the events of the first half and before the madness of the second half. It's probably the most normally shot scene and kind of acts as the calm during the storm, so I can definitely see why it was included. That being said, it's kind of too much of an exposition dump, and you would think that Carruthers would kind of help Red from this point on, but he kind of just like says, yeah, these bikers, they're fucked up, and yeah, take these things and forge an axe. I don't know if he actually tells him to forge an axe or what, they don't show that. Yeah, you just think Carruthers would have played more of a role if he's this guy who kind of like knows everything about the bikers and the cultists. Anyways, I found it interesting that Mandy likes Jupiter because it's a raging storm. Definitely mirrors Red's character who becomes a raging storm. Red's original pick of Saturn also seems to signify Mandy. Mandy points out that there's lots of myths and legends about it, and Mandy herself kind of becomes a myth and legend throughout the rest of the film. The book Mandy reads in the first half seems to parallel the ending with its description of a primordial sky, jagged rocks, and blood-red suns. Not to mention that the emerald glowing thing appears in the animated sequence. There is a theory that the entire movie was made up by Mandy. This definitely supports the theory, along with the after credits image of Mandy's drawings. Mandy almost seems to know what is going to happen once he sees the truck passing, and is also seen crying during the night of her murder, which definitely makes me wonder if there's something special about Mandy. Maybe she is a witch, or maybe she knows what's going on because she is currently imagining the story, further supporting the theory that the events of the movie are actually occurring in Mandy's head. The face meld between Mandy and Jeremiah Sand is cool and all, but does it really mean anything? Probably not, but I thought I was tripping when I saw that. It's a really cool effect, but I'm not sure why these two characters' faces were chosen to be melded. Fucking Cheddar Goblin. That's a that's the best scene of this movie. They're in a movie of so many fantastic, memorable scenes. It's just like a cruel joke to Red. He comes in after seeing his wife get murdered and he just sees Cheddar Goblin and he passes out after that. It's such a wonderfully absurd and darkly humorous scene. You ripped my shirt! I can't even do it. Like other Cates freaks out in the bathroom, funny out of context, but absolutely heartbreaking in context. This was a shirt that Mandy was wearing when the kidnapping happened, and the fact that he found it off in the house indicates that she was stripped before she was burned, adding another layer to the tragedy. I like that Red spares Sister Lucy, saving her from the cult. It shows that even as fucked up as Red was, he knew who deserved his revenge and who didn't. Red licks a finger of biker LSD and he gets completely fucked up. Meanwhile, that one biker chugged it at the beginning of the film. So I can definitely see how those bikers would become that messed up. The chemist scene is awesome. It's also one of my favorite scenes of the movie. I love the one-sided conversation. This was a scene that I had to make sure was real after watching it late at night the first time around. How did Red find him though? It's almost as if he's guided by destiny, and I kind of actually like that. He kind of just keeps on stumbling towards where he has to go. The chemist directs him north towards cultists, but how far north and where exactly he doesn't really say, but Red is still able to find it. I kind of like that Red was able to just stumble his way through his revenge, which is another reason why I think the Carruthers scene was unnecessary. I think Red could just continue stumbling his way to the bikers, but like I said, that's just a nitpick that I have. The practical effects for the death of Jeremiah are brilliant. Jeremiah begging for his life and offering Red a blowjob pretty much confirms that he was just a pathetic man in the end. The animated sequences only appear when Cade sleeps, and in each Mandy is more alive. Speaking of which, kind of going into conspiracy theory territory, but did Mandy really die? The bag didn't really seem to wiggle around that much during the burning. Just a thought, but it's kind of ambiguous, especially with that "she's still burning" line. Though that could be explained away as a very strange taunt by a fucked up biker. During my third watch, I'm of the opinion that Mandy is really dead in the events that we are shown, but it is something to think about. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you enjoyed the movie as well. Please like and subscribe and comment and do whatever you'd like to do, and subscribe to PewDiePie for more reviews of the Cinematically Bizarre, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay weird, folks.